Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on how put my teeth back in, ISO 27001 enables NIS2 compliance, a case study perspective. So we're going to be talking around requirements of NIS2, 27001, and again, if you've ever we talk on any of my webinars and we talk about this, is fundamentally what 27001 gives you as a structure. And structures are always very important, particularly when you're trying to comply with something. And so we're going to go through that. And a case study, the names have been changed to protect the innocent, as the expression goes. And so I won't actually say which company it was, and there's very good reasons for that. But we'll explain to you how being 27001 made their requirements to go for NIS2, compliance with NIS2, very, very, very straightforward because they've done all the hard work. Okay, then. So let me do my click. So my name is Andrew Patterson. For those of you who've seen me before, I do talk on most things, lots of things about 27001, DORA, AI, you name it, I've got an opinion on it. And sometimes it's reasonably intelligent and coherent, but not always. So I've been working in GRC since the early 1990s. I'm the global head of GRC and PCI consulting at IT governance. You'll notice if any of you are familiar with us, we've got a slightly different colour scheme, and we're now IT governance, a GRC solutions company. And I've been with IT governance just coming up to 7 years in just over a month. The 11th of April was when I joined the company in 2018. And I do many things. I particularly specialise in governance, risk, compliance, GRC. That's useful, being we do GRC. And but I'm an ISECA trainer. Do a lot of work in risk and all these other things. NIS, NIS2, NIS, cybersecurity, DORA, ECC. If anyone, that's a Saudi Arabian standard. But I work in quite big organisations, and I work with some small organisations. And basically, the requirements and the issues are always the same, but it's just scale quite often, you know. And I have a couple of books published. So I did a book on DORA, which is a EU regulation. So just if you're having to comply with NIS and you're thinking, oh, this is hard work, just be thankful you're not having to comply with DORA, because that's even more. And also just recently in the last week, published a book on NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2, which has a big, strong relationship with 27001. So it's very, very useful to two quite useful books. And there will be another book which is coming out in the next couple of months on hot topic of artificial intelligence, governance and risk. And if you think those are a fun read, wait till you get to that one. Okay then. So who are we? Right. So we do anything GRC. Okay, we predominantly sit there, and our core is 27001. Okay, as a business, we helped the first company to get certified against BS 7799, which was the predecessor. And for 25 years as a business, we've been helping hundreds and probably thousands of businesses get their 27001 support. We work globally. We do not recognise time difference in this business. So within my team, I have people in the UK, I have people in the USA, all over Europe, Australasia. So we work anywhere, okay? And we're a one-stop shop. Anything to do with governance, risk compliance, data protection. We do pen testing. We do cyber essentials for those of you interested in the UK. All these sort of areas. We don't sell routers and switches and things like that. We just do it's information security, cyber security, all the fun things about that. So, and again, that was a global reach. We do that. But my areas where I mainly get involved in is things like the risk management solutions. Okay, so we have an application called Cyber Comply, which is a risk management tool, 27001 support. But I'm also involved in things like, if you're interested, 42001, which is the governance or the management system for artificial intelligence. Okay, which is a new big one, and it's particularly interesting because if anything needs management, it's artificial intelligence used within organisations, because its impact of doing things you shouldn't be doing is quite significant. So these are all the sort of things we do. So, and lots of you will have been on our webinars before and know this. So you're going to be muted during this session, which means you can't heckle me, which is a nice thing. You can submit questions, and we will look at the questions later, and I'll go through them. So if you think of a question when you're going through, please submit it, and at the end of this, we'll have some time to run through the questions, and if not, we can always get back to you with an answer if it's anything slightly more technical or more complicated. And you'll get emailed the presentation, or I think that you've already got the option to access that through the various things you came through, but you'll get access to the presentation at the end of it. So don't feel that you have to be taking lots of notes and everything. You can get that information. And I will constantly be taking sips of stuff as I'm doing this, because I don't know where you are, but it's quite obvious where I am. Spring has not arrived yet. Okay, so agenda. We're going to look through this, and there's sort of reoccurring themes as we go through this. So what's new? So where are we with NIS 2? Where are we on the journey of it being ratified? Really interesting subject. The requirements, high level, what requirements are in NIS 2, and this might be different depending on where you are, but fundamentally they have the same requirements, and that was one of the requirements behind the new version of NIS 2, or the new version of NIS became NIS 2. And then I'll talk about a case study of one of my customers who wanted to know where they were with their compliance journey, amongst other things on NIS 2. Then the next thing is a look at the practical solutions, how ISO 27001 simplifies NIS 2 alignment. And again, I mentioned that very beginning, that 27001 is about structure. It's a management system. It's about how you manage things and a system to do it. So it's very useful. Then talk about certification with NIS 2 compliance, and then we'll do the Q&As. And I can see somebody has already put up a question, which I will answer at the end of it, because it's actually a really interesting one. Not necessarily about NIS 2, but it will be, I will answer that definitely. Okay, so before we do that, this is the bit where we need a bit of interaction. Basically our way to make sure you're all awake, where I'm going to ask you a few questions, get you to answer the polls, and then we will give me some steer on maybe some of the things that we need to talk about. So the first question: where is your organisation in its NIS 2 compliance journey? Just starting, in progress, certified, and then we are not considering it at this time. So I get to see all the scores coming up here. So yeah, it's at the moment we're not considering NIS 2 at this time. Or now it's just starting. So we're coming up to about 50% of you have voted. We're over 50%. Come on, a few of you haven't voted. There's no charge. Oh, yeah. Okay. Come on, let's get a few more so we get near 80%. 75. Come on, are we going to hit 80%? Oh, almost. Yes, we passed 80% votes. Brilliant. So that poll's now ended. So the biggest one just starting. Some are in progress. Some have got certification, and a few we are not considering NIS 2 at this time. But obviously, you've got some sort of interest in NIS 2. So I'm going to go to the next one. What is your biggest challenge in implementing or maintaining ISO 27001? Understanding the requirements and scoping in ISMS. Preparing for certification and audit process. That's always fun. Managing ongoing compliance and documentation. Choosing a certification body. So all of those are going to can be challenging, can be less challenging. All depends where you are on your journey. So again, looking at this, we're hitting about, we're almost at 40%. Go on, let's try and get near 80% like we did last time. We're at 60. About to hit 70%. We've gone past 70% voted. 75. Oh, I think we might have just peaked at 75. So I think that's where we're going to be. So understanding the requirements and scoping in ISMS. is the top one. Oh, the second one, managing ongoing compliance and documentation. Yeah, always a bit of fun on that. Only 2% we said about choosing a certification body. So the requirements and scoping in ISMS, and then we'll talk about scoping a little bit later actually, because that's quite relevant with this too. Right, and then the next question: which of the solutions will most help your NIS2 and ISO 27001 journey? Hands-on consultancy to fast-track our implementation and compliance, pre-written documentation and templates, a software solution, training and staff awareness. Not sure, I'd like to explore my options. Right, so the votes are coming in. We're over 50% now. Well, let's try and get past 75%. Somewhere between 75 and 80 would be nice. 65, 68. Oh, same. We're getting there. If you haven't casted your vote, just go on. A couple of more. Yeah, we've hit 75%, so I think that's good enough. So most people are talking about the biggest one there is not sure, I'd like to explore my options. 12% hands-on consultancy, pre-written documentation, 27%, a software solution, simplify compliance, training and staff awareness and courses. So it's pretty broad on that. So I think we can safely say that, it's depending on where you are, depending on what your knowledge is, depending on what your experience is, different people in different places. So the first bit, what's new? Updates on NIS2 compliance since the 17th of October 2014 deadline. Yeah. Now, it's interesting how this is. So what's the 2024 deadline? So that's very simply. So the 2024 deadline was basically it needed to be moved in, become part of a EU country's legal system, into law, act of parliament, whatever you want to call it. Now, so why is that? So there's a thing to just understand here. NIS2 is a directive. There's two types of legislation which go through the EU: regulations and directives. So I'll tell you what the first one. A regulation is something like DORA, Digital Operational Resilience Act, if you've heard of that. That is an EU regulation. That just comes into law globally across the European Union, centrally managed. You do not do anything about it. It just happens. And one of those happened on the 17th of January this year. A directive needs to go through each national parliament to become law in that jurisdiction. And directives are actually open to a little bit more of interpretation. Local rules, you can do certain things, etc. And so that's where we is. So that's where we are. So the NIS2 is, you'll see the second thing is the second version. So there was a NIS directive which came in 2016, actually came into law or came into force in the UK, for example, on the 18th of May 2018, same day as GDPR. And that's basically when it came into rules within the European Union. Now, NIS was quite good, but it was open to a lot of interpretation. So basically, they decided they needed to come up with NIS2. So, and this was for quite a few reasons. So first of all, recognises the increased reliance on network and information systems in critical services. And we'll look at some of the critical services because this was all about critical national infrastructure. Well, critical national infrastructure is quite wide, and this too understands that a little bit more. Understands also that cybersecurity, cyber threats, the world we live in has got a lot more complicated. And boy, do we see how complicated it is nowadays. And understanding that about supply chain attacks, etc., and all that sort of stuff. There was a example I've just seen on LinkedIn today of get the company right, a very old transport company in Northampton called Knights of Old, which had been in operation for 180 years, and they've got out of business because they got hit by a ransomware attack. Okay, I know that because I actually know the company because that's part of England I come from, Warwickshire, but just across the road from there. So this is very real. So a company had been around 180 years, got taken out by basically ransomware. And again, the NIS2 is about aligning cybersecurity efforts, so we're all on the same page. One of the things which was a problem with NIS was if you were complying with it in Spain, it didn't mean that you were complying with the requirements in Germany. And NIS 2 has been designed, but there's far less wiggle room, I'm going to call it, for interpretation by local jurisdictions. So we were talking about the deadline, 17th of October. Deadline for member states to enact NIS 2 into national law. Okay, and the next slide is going to be quite interesting in that. So from that date, you have to start complying with the requirements. And one of the first things you need to think about is, and we'll talk about this in a second, is identify if your organisation falls within scope. And there's two things: there's sectors and then there's differences. Okay, but if you're essential or important, okay, and then you need to work those out. And if that's in place and it's gone into legislation in the country you live in, you've then got to register with a competent authority. And you've really got to understand where you are with cybersecurity. And we'll go through the things and why it relates to 27001 as we go through the webinar. But that's really interesting. And the first thing I'd say to you, when you look at NIS 2 and what it actually wants you to do, really you should be doing it. You know, really this is the sort of thing that you should be understanding. You know, as a business, you should be complying with these things because there's nothing really very strange in them. Okay. So back to that first point, 17th of October 2024. I'm now going to show you a list of the actual countries that have actually enacted it into law. Now, I always get this wrong. It's either 26 or 27 countries in the European Union. I think it's 27. It might have been 28. Well, it's either one of those two numbers anyway. So quite a few countries. And look at how short that list is. So the first country to get enacted was Belgium, which if you'd read the press a couple of years ago in our compliance world, they always thought that Belgium would probably be about the last one to do it because they don't have the most stable governments in the world. But you look at other countries. So, you know, the Republic of Ireland had an election back last year. So they were about to put it into legislation and it didn't happen. Germany's just had an election. It might be a while before they get a government. So because it has to go through parliaments, there's lots of things which can affect countries. Okay. So currently only Belgium, Croatia, Hungary, Italy, Latvia and Lithuania have enacted it into their legislation. So if you live in those countries, you've got somewhere to go and register that you're covered by NIS too. And that is quite important because it's about understanding, you know, if you're critical, important or essential and important organisation, and that has implications further down the line. So what is the key things going on at the moment? So first of all, on the 28th of November, the EU, the Commission started proceedings against the 23 member states for not fully transponding the NIS 2 directives. You'll see that list of who's done this has increased since then, so a couple have done that. And they were given a 2-month ultimatum to comply. So 28th of October. Oh, right. So yeah, they're in trouble. Yeah, all those countries are in trouble. The key thing again, as we said, the scope was expanded from this, and the consequence of non-compliance. And this was one of the problems which was with NIS, is that, and at last looking, I'm not aware of anywhere where anyone was fined in this directive. But if you look at this, you can be fined up to €10 million or 2% of global annual revenue, which is higher, and that's for essential entities. And important entities, fines of up to €7 million or 1.4 of global annual revenue, which is higher. And this global annual revenue, I always think is interesting. But GDPR was the first one to bring that in. But it's not just, you might have a small business in Europe, or you might be a European business, but your European business is only a small part of what you do, but it's global turnover. And as we said, you know, they've also released a report in November 2024, and they're a bit concerned about how this is all going to work and happen because of countries not implementing it. But I think that we will find in the next 3 to 6 months, a lot of countries will have implemented it because most countries have got it somewhere in their legislative process, but being hit by elections and things like that. So if you think about it, Ireland's had an election, Germany's had an election, Romania's had an election. Lots of these countries have been going through elections at various times, and that sort of does get in the way. Well, if you haven't got a government, you can't put things through legislation. Right, so key NIS2 requirements: reporting, supply chain accountability. So what are the key features of it? So we mentioned it's expanded the scope. There's higher security requirements, and they're a bit more specific about what you need to do. They're more detailed on incident reporting. Okay, governance requirements, accountability, and the enforcement and penalties have increased. So, like a lot of things from cyber resilience, governance, whatever you want to call it, the regulatory approach is turning the volume up, not turning the volume down. We hear lots of conversations about deregulation and various countries and everything. I don't think that's going to happen in our space. Not in cybersecurity, information security. Increased regulation is the way it's going to go for a considerable amount of time, and we can see that with other things coming through, like the AI Act in the European Union, etc. So the next slide just gives you a little bit more of how these two things look together, the comparison. So NIS directive used to talk about essential services, critical national infrastructure. This has now been expanded to more sectors. Risk management, is a bit limited, more comprehensive in NIS 2. But you should be looking at your risks anyway, because risks drive decisions. What are your risks? And then you address your risks, and then you reduce the likelihood of something bad happening to you. You never remove it completely, but it's about doing that. Incident reporting, standardise across the union. This is what you do, and talk about what those timelines are in a bit. And then that enforcement. It's gone up from €1 million up to 10 million, or 2% of global turnover. Okay, massive fines. So that first point talks about extended to more sectors. So you'll have on this now. There is a link there to the NIS2, a quick reference guide, and that's from the Republic of Ireland, and it's actually a really good document to read and I reference it, and we take things from that in this presentation, because that's come from the Irish Competent Authority, and although they haven't even put it into the legislation yet, it's actually a very good document to give you some more detail. So if you look at this is telling you what is new. So you've got new into that. So these top ones on the left hand side were always in there, and we've now got wastewater, public admin, ICT service management, space, and it says banking and financial management, but if they're covered by DORA takes precedence over NIS 2. And other critical sectors, so research, food production and distribution, that's a biggie, massive. Manufacturing, and that's another thing about manufacturing, is understanding this. And if you think about the first one there, food production and distribution, we have a just in time delivery model. Okay, so supermarkets do not hold huge amounts of stock themselves; it's held centrally. So if that system isn't working, which manages the distribution, well, you suddenly don't get stuff turning up in supermarkets, and that is not good. That is why you sit there and think and go, yeah, that is critical. That's critical national infrastructure, because if you can't feed people, that becomes a problem quite quickly. Manufacturing, waste management. Waste management. It's back to wastewater, those sort of things. Definitely into critical national infrastructure. Postal and courier services. And then we're talking manufacturing, production and distribution of chemicals. So the whole thing has expanded, particularly where, depending on what you do around ICT services and understanding all that, because it's all about supply chains. Okay, and this again we were shown during COVID how actually some of our supply chains were actually quite robust, but a lot of them were under a lot of pressure. So we have vulnerabilities there. So that's some of the thought. That link to the NIS to a quick reference guide on the Irish Competent Authorities website is very, very, very useful. So case study, ISO 27001 driven NIS2 compliance success. So the organisation we're talking about, They are not the biggest organisation in the world, but what they actually do is very critical. Okay, so they have a big impact on lots of things across the European Union. So this is an organisation who's always taken compliance quite seriously. Okay, for lots of things, and they had an established 27001 for, I think, probably about 12 years, probably a little bit more than that, and very well run, audited constantly, improved, etc., and all that sort of stuff. So their challenge is that they know they've got stuff going on, so they need to understand if there were any gaps in the current implementation that would cause any issues from compliance with NIS 2. So I went in, it was actually me who did this, and I went and did a gap analysis against them. And it didn't take me a particularly long time because I knew what they got and their systems and all that sort of stuff. So we did a gap analysis for compliance. And at the end of it, we came up with some improvements, which we'll talk about what we actually found in from that. But this next slide is a really, really useful one and a good reference for people to understand. So NIS 2, so NIS 2 doesn't talk about you go and get 27001. If you'd looked at the old NIS requirements and guidance within the UK, it did actually mention 27001. So you need to be able to show that you're complying with something. So having something like 27001, which has had independent certification by an accredited certification body, accredited by a national accreditation body, member of the IAF, the proper certification, shows that you've done stuff. You've got it independently verified. And from that same document I mentioned about earlier, the Irish Competent Authority lists these key things that you need to think about when you're doing this too. So it's risk analysis and information security. Okay, are you doing risk? Are you doing it properly? What are you doing about incident handling? Business continuity measures, backup disaster recovery, crisis management, supply chain security, security and system acquisition, development and maintenance, including vulnerability handling and disclosure. Just put my teeth back in. So, yeah, what are you doing? Where are your systems? How are you managing your systems? What's your life cycle on it? Policies and procedures to assess and the effectiveness of cybersecurity risk management measures. So, how do you know what you've said is working? What do you do? How do you measure, monitor, all that sort of stuff? Basic computer hygiene and training. Now, another one where you can find that is if you've got a thing called Cyber Essentials. Interesting enough, is UK based thing, but quite a lot of European businesses do it as well. And that is about basic cyber hygiene. That's about, like, have you got access control on your firewalls? It's quite basic, but it's a very good thing. It deals with 80% of the potential things which could go wrong. If you're dealing in Cyber Essentials, you're going to be dealing with 80% of the things which could be going on. Policies and appropriate use of cryptography and encryption. Human resources security, access control policies and assets management. So human resource, are you meeting all those requirements? Use of multi-factor, secured video text comms, and secured emergency communications. So that's more like, have you got multi-factor authentication being used, etc. And on the right-hand side, I've listed in there both the clauses, which is the first half of 27001, and the controls from Annex A. And as you can see, there is a lot of commonality. You've got a lot of those can be driven from what you're doing within 27001. Now, the key thing when you implement 27001 is you implement the requirements of the standard and the requirements of your system. Okay, so this organisation had this all in place. They were doing all this, no exclusions, and a couple of exclusions around outsourced software development, etc., which is quite a common one. And at the end of the gap analysis, this was the conclusions I came with. They had 3 things they had to do. Okay. And the first one, develop a specific procedure for noting the NCSs. So that's the National Cybersecurity things, the Cyber Incident Response Team, a national thing about, and I'll show on the next slide about the timescales. So they need to build in their incident response process that this is what they would do to meet the requirements in this too. So this is just basically, they put some more detail in it. It was actually an annex into the policy. This is what we have to do to keep us then. should consider an additional process specifically addressing crisis management. So although they've got stuff about business continuity and cyber incident response and everything, they hadn't got anything specifically saying crisis management. So I said you need to do something about crisis management, just a small procedure, etc., supporting that. And that's because sometimes with regulations and directives, you really want to be, if you get audited, you want to smack them over the nose with it. So there's no doubt that this does what they said. So you call it the thing that they're expecting to be called. Because sometimes they're not as understanding that, okay, you go, well, you've got it in my business continuity, crisis management, and you talk instant response. And actually, it does crisis management, but it doesn't say crisis management. So that's always something worth noting. And the third thing, when the legislation is transposed into law, the organisation will be required to register as an important or essential entity. Well, because it isn't in law, they haven't done it yet, but I told them that's what they had to do. So 3 really minor, it's half day's work. And they knew then that they were compliant with NIS 2 because they were compliant with the requirements of 27001 and doing all those things. And they could show that they got risk being done. They could show they got management. They got a management system. They were dealing with cryptography. All the parts were required. So back to that first one, and this is one of the main changes where NIS 2 is different to NIS, was it specified what you had to do within instance. So if you've got an incident within 24 hours, you need to do an early warning, let them know what's happening. Is it a suspected malicious act with potential cross-border implications? Right, I'm just going to mute my microphone for a second because I'm about to do some coughing. Okay, I'm back. you didn't need to hear or watch that. Okay, so 72 hours official incident notification. So you have to notify within 72 hours. Okay, intermittent to the serious or relevant competent authority. Intermittent status reports, you can do that, update it, but the 72 hours is the key thing, a bit like data protection. And then final report 1 month, or if incident ongoing at the time of final report, a progress report, and final report one month after the end. But it's that key thing is 72 hours. So we just had to define a procedure for them into their information security management system around that, about how they identified and making sure they got the contact information, etc., and all that sort of stuff. So pretty straightforward. It's just so when something happens, they can go, right, that's what I do. Yeah, so they don't have to think about it. It's very, very clear. So we make the conclusion then of what I did from that case study. If you have an ISMS meeting the requirements of 27001 in place with a suitable scope, so the scope makes sense about what you're covering in relation to what would be covered by NIS 2, and certified by an accredited certification body, you will have to make minimal changes to the ISMS. This can be done via the continual improvement process. If you are developing an ISMS meeting the requirements of 27001, make sure it has a suitable scope in addressing NIS 2, and as part of your legal, regulatory, and contractual requirements. This will help you meet the requirements of NIS 2. So this is a key thing with 27001 and the clauses. You have to detail contractual legal requirements and make sure you're meeting those. So you build in NIS 2 into your information security management system when you're doing 27001, and you just make sure that those specific things are built into it. But you're going to be doing stuff about that anyway. So it's just making sure you're dotting I's and crossing T's, building NIS 2 into 27001. So how ISO 27001 simplifies NIS 2 alignment. So these are things, so more if you're just thinking about what you've got to do with NIS 2. So you've got to do risk management. You've got to do your incident reporting. You've got to do appoint responsible individuals for cyber security oversight. You've got to do supply chain security. You've got to do all of these things. So those are the key things you need to do. So if you're just looking at doing NIS 2 and you're not, conduct a gap, look at the requirements. Okay. are we meeting them? You need to implement formal risk management program, instant response, security awareness training for staff, and looking at your supply chain. And the easiest way of doing this is doing 27001, without a doubt, because you don't if you're doing it without a standard to guide you, it is going to be more complicated. When you're doing it, common challenges, lack of internal expertise. You might have people who understand GRC, you might not have them. You might be a GRC person. If you're a consultant and you go and do this, this is your bread and butter. This is doing what you do every day if you use the 27001. Need to make sure that you've got standard templates, etc., and all that sort of stuff, reporting information. And another one is the supply chain vulnerabilities, understanding what your supply chain's doing. What is your supply chain? Don't just think about third party. What's their supply chain? If you're doing things like DORA, you really go down the rabbit hole on that one. You keep where do you stop? But understanding that risk, and it's all about, just remember, NIS 2 is all about supply chains, and it's all about risk, because you're part of that supply chain, and it's all driven about understanding what your risks are and mitigating them. So you need to think about what you're doing about your users. You can and things that tools to help you comply. So you can do an information security management system. As I say, we do lots of these. Instant monitoring tools. Now, what we mean there, depending on how big you are, have you got anything monitoring your systems so you know that something's going wrong, so you can actually identify an incident? That can also be manual things, making sure that people know how to report incidents to your service desk. And you've got to understand how you respond to incidents, all those sort of things. And again, back to the suppliers, you can get vendor assessment platforms and all these sort of wonderful things to happen. So 27001 is certification as the international solution. So at some point, you may be asked to say to an organisation, to your competent authority, so how are you complying with NIS 2? There is provision in there if you're essential that they may want to audit you. Even if you're important, they can come and audit you. Yeah, but it's more likely with essential. So how do you do that? You go, right, we've got a certification, ISO 27001, our scope, and we might even mention NIS 2 in the scope. Okay, and you go, bump, there's my certification. Makes life a lot easier for you. Makes life an awful lot easier. Now, particularly, they're going to be more interested if something's gone wrong. But they having that to give assurance. It's all about assurance that they sit there and you go, well, we've been sensible here. We've tried to do the right thing. Something's gone wrong, but we've done all these things to make sure it didn't. But things still happen. So again, ISO 27001. It's the main system out there. It's the most widely used and most understood, and it's the most straightforward. Actually, it's pretty straightforward if you follow a set procedure, and this is the sort of thing that we help organisations with, and that can be really small organisations to really big organisations, and lots of different sectors. So when you're scoping a 27001, particularly you need to take into consideration for what you're scoping makes sense for NIS 2. Okay, so it's about how you're dealing with your ICT and your cyber. So you might just decide that your scope is just going to be about IT, because that's what your scope says. It's sensible, but that will cover you. So you need to think about how many sites and geographies would be part of it, full-time equivalents. Is there a single governing management? So your scope needs to have a single management authority. And if you think about it, NIS 2 wants to have a single management authority as well. And you need to understand what your technical stuff is about. Although because it's 27001, it's not all about technology. It's people, process, technology. And if you think about a lot of those requirements in NIS about people and process. So if you want to go for it, you go for certification, okay? And this is where we can sort of help you with it. So we have a streamlined process for implementing 27001. We understand NIS 2. We understand anything to do with management systems, NIS, NIST, SIS, all these sort of lovely, initials just to confuse people. But yeah, so 27001 and NIS2, bread and butter. We know how to implement that quickly, efficiently, and effectively, so you can get to that point and you're turning around to your senior management and going, with confidence, we meet the requirements of NIS2, okay, because this, and this, and that's been internally audited, that's been externally audited, all these different things. So it all makes it clear and more straightforward. Right. So we have an approach, okay. So project mandate, really important. You need to get leadership buy-in, okay. Senior management. If you have leadership buy-in, they understand why you're doing it. And actually, NIS2 is a good way of going, well, we need this because it helps us get, and this is something we have to get. This isn't a nice to have. We have to show that we're compliant with NIS2. So that's the mandate. Why are we doing this? Initiation, goals, objectives, what you need to do, all these. So project initiation, and then you start building your ISMS, your management system. So it's about a system. It's a system of looking at risk, dealing with risk, and all that sort of stuff. Central to NIS2. So you build up that management framework. It gives you approach to dealing with risk. Okay. It talks about resourcing. It talks about awareness, competence, monitoring, management review. All these things which help you demonstrate you're dealing with NIS2. You need to understand what your baseline security criteria is. So when you look at the security controls, what have you got? What haven't you got? What do you need to develop? What don't you need to develop because it's already there? And this should all be driven by risk management. So the lengthful and what's it going to say? Ferociousness, that's the wrong word. But the complexity, the detail of your security controls are based on the risk it is addressing. Okay. And I'll give you an example is that cryptography, which is one of the things you have to do. You could be an organization, your cryptography policy could be 2 paragraphs long or 2 sentences. Or if it's a real big part of what you do because of risk, say you're a defense manufacturer, it might be 40, 50, 60 pages long. All the key, what you do about this and all that sort of stuff, because that addresses the risk that you are facing. 27001 is very pragmatic. It's not prescriptive. It's all based on risk. So understanding that risk management. From that, you then implement the controls and the processes. You then go into your measure, management, and review. So you'll do an internal audit, you have a management review, and then go into the process of getting certified against the requirements of the standard. And that's the entertaining thing, because we all love being audited. So this is what it gives you, and this is why it's useful for NIS2. You have a process to make sure you're going to be compliant. So if you don't have a management system and you do a load of work for NIS2, at the end of that, you probably are conforming the requirements in NIS2, but you've got no way of making sure that you still are a year later. With the way that you have a 3-year certification, you have internal audits, you have surveillance audits, and then you go for a recertification at the end of 3 years. It focuses the organization's mind. It makes sure that you've got the resources there to continually do that, because NIS2 compliance is not, I've run a project, at the end of it, we've got everything in place, let's just don't worry about it now, because you're then not complying with the requirements. And all of this, and what we will give you is that certification guarantee, that certificate gives you that confidence that you're dealing, and gives management confidence that you're dealing with what NIS2 requires. So 3 very simple things that you think about what this delivers. So if you go 27001, your compliance with your requirements, of 27001-22. Compliance, and this is the key thing, with applicable legal, regulatory, contractual, security obligations. That's where you drive the NIS2 from, contractual, legal, regulatory. And compliance with organisation specific needs for information security. So you build that. So you're doing 3 things in your 27001. And compliance means consistent and full compliance. Controls applied for all the time, every time in scope, and working effectively. Not the easiest task all the time, but well worth doing. But just think about this, how else this is benefiting your business, etc. Now, You can go for certification, and this is where you get the value to deal with anything which comes from competent authority relating to NIS 2, where, oh, so how do we know we're doing this? You know you're doing this, and you can prove it because you've got NIS 2 and you've built this into your system. So you've got your internal audits, you go through your certification, stage 1, stage 2. You have continual assessment visits, okay, where that external independent individual. Now, just remember, if we've helped you implement your system, we're not the people who come and do the external auditing. That's independent certification bodies, okay, who are accredited by national accreditation. So you've got that as well. It's not just me saying, oh, yeah, you're doing it. Yeah, great. You know, I don't mark my own homework. You know, that independent thing is so crucial. And that's particularly going to be crucial is if there's a problem. Because what it shows, because it doesn't mean you're perfect. It doesn't mean you're going to stop 100% of things going wrong or instance or cybersecurity events or instance. But you're going to have ways of dealing with it. And so when it comes to, so what happened here, you'll be able to show to your competent authority, well, we did all this, you know, we weren't negligent. We were reasonable in our actions. So that's okay. That's really important. A little bit thing there, which is maybe useful there to think about. You need to go and get a certification body, etc. And, you know, you need to think who that is. Okay. And you'll have some out there which will start talking about what we use to deal in and understand this too, which could be quite useful. But there's lots of different things which the certification bodies are. The key thing is there you need to go for an accredited certification body. Now, they're accredited by a national accreditation body who are a member of the IAF, okay? And that, with that certification, that's globally understood, etc., and those sort of things. And how can we help? Oh, yes. Funny that. Speaking for 45 minutes. Oh, yeah, there are things we can do. So we can do consultancy, around 27001 and NIS 2. We can do training, so around the 27001, standards, e-learning, lots of books. Okay, so we have books on 27001, NIS, DORA, all those sort of things. You'll find you've got enough books in there for about a 15-week vacation in the sun, but you'd still have stuff that you wouldn't get to everything that we've produced. But all of these things start to build up and support that picture of what you need to do. So what I've tried to go there is just show you a bit about what NIS 2 is. That example where we've specifically gone in, and I've done this for several companies, and we're helping lots of other companies doing this at the moment, where we're implementing 27001, but making sure it's there and it covers the NIS 2 requirements, which at that point doesn't actually take an awful lot more work because you're doing it from scratch. But as I showed you, if you've got ISO 27001 and it's running well and it's implemented, you probably have to do minimal changes to it to make sure you hit the NIS 2 requirements. And it's really semantics when it comes down to it. It's just a couple of dotting the I's and crossing the T's. So that is the webinar bit we've done. So in a moment, I'm going to answer some questions. So bear with me. I'm reading them first, then I'll read them out to you. Right, so I've got a question here, and it was obviously that first comment I made. And I really like this question. So the person who did it, I won't say your name, gets a gold star for us. Do you think GRC would be automated with AI now, or is the need for GRC more important today than ever? Because when it comes to cybersecurity, information security, GRC is more important than it has ever been. Now, AI is one of my other little subjects as well. Technically, I'm not great on AI because it's confusing. But if you think about it, AI does lots of things, and why are we doing it? Why is a business doing it? Why has it implemented it? What benefit does it give us? Does this drive value? So if you're going to a business and they're going, we must use this large language models, or we use this to do predictive maintenance in operational technology. GRC people, governance, risk and compliance people are more important, because the importance of monitoring and controlling and governing what's going on is more. And I'm going to use an example on this. This is my favorite quote at the time. I don't know who originally did it. but Brian O'Driscoll, former Irish rugby union captain, said, and he's talking about the difference between knowledge and wisdom. And this is what AI is. AI has knowledge, but it does not have wisdom. Okay, it might do one day, but until it does, and I think we'll arrive at that. So knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. So I know that sounds quite flippant, but that's what we're talking about. So what GRC people have is we have wisdom, and that's what we need to bring to the game. So you might have some tools sitting there doing stuff and automating things, etc. But you need that GRC, that oversight, the understanding that this is how we're controlling things, okay, and that's very important. And this then so it's related to this too, because you've got to start understanding the implications of using AI in your business, how it affects you complying with this too. So, but don't think about AI as a technical question. It's a governance question and it's a risk question. Okay, so thank you very much. Next question. Oh, so a lot of products of ours that are already 27001 certified. What are the unique requirements in NIS 2 that can be added to our standards, policies, and also already certified product services to, I can't see, to make, let's see, do I press on that please? To make it compliant with NIS 2, thanks. Well, I think I sort of covered that a little bit. If you've got 27001 certified in your organization, you're really probably just going to need to do something around maybe a crisis management policy. Depends what your business continuity is. Does that make the requirements? So around crisis management and something somewhere defining the incident response timelines. And then you've got to go and register on your national registration for NIS 2. But if you've got it already in working, it's very, very little. I mean, it's just do a gap against it. Now, that's not a definitive answer because 27001 can be implemented very differently in very different places and with different scopes. But if that scope of yours meets the requirements, covers what NIS 2 is looking at, yeah, you're well on the way. Right, okay, so let me just try and next question. Right. Does food production include organisations providing services to farmers, including farm chemicals such as pesticides? It covers chemicals. I don't specifically know the answer. So, talks about food production. I'd have to look at that. I think probably would do because if you're talking about chemicals, chemicals are covered by this too. So maybe need to check on that and give it a little bit of thought. As with a lot of these things, it's probably needs a little bit. Some of them on the fringes about what definition, but that's part of the food chain, supply chain. So I would say probably you are, but that would maybe be the question that you'd ask your competent authority, because at the end of the day, in your jurisdiction, they're the only person whose actually opinion on that actually matters. Okay, I could say anything. I might be right. I might be wrong. I might be right in one country and I might be wrong in another country because they are all going to be slightly different. So thank you. And does NIS 2 apply to UK only operational businesses? No. It might apply to you in a way if you're part of a supply chain, which is in the European Union, but if you're actually working just in the UK, yeah, no requirement. No requirement. You might be covered by NIS, which is the original one, because that hasn't been replaced. The UK is going to update its NIS requirements at some point, but guess what? An election got in the way. Okay, but for the UK businesses, you know what our next version of NIS or whatever they're going to call it is, ain't going to be that different to what they're doing in the European Union. I would almost, I'd bet your house on that. Not my own house. I'd bet your house on that. Okay. Next question. Okay, so what does NIS2 mean for suppliers? We're a very small energy monitoring system supplier with a cloud-based application. Some of our clients are food production and manufacturing companies and public sector bodies. Right. If they are in the European Union, um, you are going to be part of their supply chain, and you're going to need to be able to show that you're complying with the requirements of NIS. You've got cloud systems in there. Just remember 27001. We've implemented that into companies with 2 people. Okay, 27001 is scalable, so it's still going to take a certain amount of investment, certain amount of commitment, but it's not as bad as you might think it is. So, and we do lots of businesses which are 10 to 30 people. Okay, so again, I would still suggest you know, next question, can you confirm if for micro business do we need to comply if we are part of the larger business supply chain? The larger business will want you to show them what you're doing, etc. So that will come from them, rather than if you're not registered, they'll be looking at their supply chain. You might get security questionnaires, and then it'll be down to them as to what they think. How much time I've got? 3 minutes. We don't have any courses on NIS2, but we have courses on 27001. Okay, a NIS2 course would be quite quick, and we would sit there a bit like I was saying, go and do 27001. So do a 27001 course, thinking about what you need to do with this. And I say is if you're doing it with one of our guys, you'd sit there and go, so how do I do that? And you can talk about it on the course, or even people on the course. Doing courses with people is brilliant because you learn, you get lots of information, you get lots of understanding from other people. Um, So the next one, the person who got the gold star for the my favourite question at the beginning was just asking, is it going to be a regulatory requirement in the UK? No, but NIS in the UK is going to change at some point, and it probably ain't going to be much dissimilar to what happening with NIS too. NIS 2 does not apply to all sizes of organisations. If you're a small organisation in a sense, less than a certain amount of people, and that document which we give link to is a very useful, has what is essential, what is important, sectors, and based on size. Okay, and I've got enough time for the last question, maybe. Yeah, so NIS 2 is a directive. When directive, so it's saying is NIS 2 an EU level requirement, then breaks down to numerous competent authorities. So in each country, there will be a competent authority who's responsible for making sure people do meet the requirements and comply with NIS 2 directive. Okay, I've just answered. There's no more questions there. There was quite a few good questions on there. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for your time. And I think I'm going to probably give you 2 minutes of your day back. So thank you very much and good luck.